Hi there. Welcome to the Inspired by You podcast series by MindKite. Yes, it's me, your host, Jamie Kerr, and I'm joined today by a very exciting guest, someone that I actually think needs no introduction at all, but out of being polite, I will do so. I'm joined by the lovely Carole Baskin. Carole, thank you very much for joining me.
Hey, all you cool cats and kittens. I'm so glad to be here with you today, Jamie.
And there it is, that title line there. I love that. Carole, this podcast series that I do is all about people that I'm inspired by or inspiring people to the world. And many people will know you from a Netflix documentary sort of series that was run. I found you a very interesting lady. I researched a lot of the stuff you do, the sort of big cat rescues and things like that. I was just wondering if you could tell me a little bit about yourself and maybe tell the viewers who don't know you just a little bit about your background.
Well, thank you for asking. I actually founded Big Cat Rescue back in 1992 with the rescue of a single bobcat, which led us to rescuing 56 bobcats off of a fur farm the following year, and then 28 the following year, and then 22 the following year. And then people started calling me and asking me to take their lions and tigers. And so with each one of those rescues, I thought, how hard could this be to fix this? And I naively thought that I could fix this very easily, that surely there would be no reason for people to have lions and tigers in their backyards in America. But it's turned out to be a nearly 30-year slog. The good news is that we are finally gaining on it. And I think that our federal bill will pass this year that will make it illegal for people to have big cats in their backyards. The main thing is it'll stop the cub handling, which is causing hundreds of lions and tigers and ligers, which are a hybrid. It's causing hundreds of those cats to be bred, used very roughly by the public who, if you can imagine, toddlers dropping these tiger cubs on their heads, it's a wonder they ever even survive the handling. But if they do, then they often end up in backyards and basements, or they end up in the illegal trade for their parts. And all of that is expanding the market for illegal parts, which causes more pressure on tigers in the wild, who will then be killed by poachers, because it's a lot cheaper to shoot a tiger than to raise one for 4 years, 5 years until it's full size, because it costs us $10,000 per year per tiger just to provide the food and vet care. So this is how we have to save the tiger in the wild, is by ending the private possession and the cub petting.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So you started this journey a long time ago, and you called it, a slog. You've realised there's so much depth to this, and how many people were keeping, as you've said, these animals in which would be poor conditions for this type of animal. And from the start, did you realise that you were going to go so deep into all this? And I mean, you started with one bobcat, you went back and you got all the rest of these bobcats, but going from a bobcat to then to a lion or a tiger is a massive transition. I mean, here in the UK, some people struggle to look after dogs and cats here, and never mind big wildlife and exotic wildlife like you've, dedicated your life to. And I'm just wondering if you can tell me a little bit about that transition, from that early rescues to the rescues and the way you work now.
Well, thankfully, the UK has made most of this activity illegal back in the 70s. That's why you guys don't have the problems there that we have here in America. If we had followed your lead back in the 70s, I wouldn't be talking to you today about this. I wouldn't have had hitmen hired to kill me for speaking up about protecting these animals. My life would have been a whole lot easier if we had just followed suit, but we are lagging decades behind the UK as far as laws to protect the animals here. As far as going from taking care of a bobcat to taking care of a tiger, here in the state that I live in Florida, you actually have to have 1,000 hours experience with that type of animal before you can have it. And a lot of people just lie on their applications and nobody monitors that. But I did it the right way. I actually went to a place where a lady had big cats and took care of her big cats to learn how to do that. What I have discovered in, 40 years of dealing with exotic cats and 30 years with these bigger cats is that the smaller the cat, the more dangerous they can be as far as personal injury goes, because I have the good sense not to walk into a cage with a tiger, but I have had the stupid sense to think that I could break up a bobcat fight between two 20-pound bobcats. I mean, like, how hard could that be? You just grab them by the scruff and you pull them apart from each other, and they both end up tearing you to pieces while they're still continuing to fight. So all of my scars come from breaking up smaller cat fights. My vet said that it's because the bigger cats don't have anything to prove, whereas the smaller cats are always having to fight for their place in this world, and so they're a little scrappier.
Absolutely. And I can see that, you're very well versed and you're well educated with these animals. And I'll tell you something I noticed about you personally is you're very majestic with these animals, the way you interact and the way you talk about the animals as well. I can tell there's a deep passion, care and understanding there as well, which now that I've, the show and stuff that you were involved in had been highlighted, I looked so much deeper into it and I've done my own research and things around that. And most people that are on the wrong side of this, let's say, they just don't have your mannerism with animals. They don't have the majestic nature that you have. And I can really see that now. So when I'm watching someone that I don't think is quite credible with animals, I notice it straight away. And you're always the pinpoint comparison that I use. As I say, you're an inspiration. And I think often, the media and people that take stories, journalists and things like that, they extract the parts that sell the most. They extract what they can spin to look quite bad. And I've always been a controversial person myself. I always like to look through that. And a lot of the media attention has been put on yourself as well, good and bad. But there was a lot of bad out there. How do you handle that sort of media attention, especially knowing that you've got such a heart for these animals and you're trying to do good?
Well, obviously you think for yourself. And I have found since Tiger King, not a whole lot of people do that. A lot of people are happy to just watch a TV show and believe what they see and not look any deeper than that. And as far as how I deal with the animals, I think there's so many people who say, oh, it would be my life's dream to touch a tiger. And yet, if you spend any time around a tiger, you will quickly understand that tiger does not want to be touched by you. And if you have any respect at all for wildlife, you're not going to impose your will on that animal. And I think that is probably what you're witnessing as being the big difference between people who are using the animals to aggrandize themselves or to share that opportunity to touch the wild in exchange for money back to them. Whereas anybody who's really protecting these animals is not going to allow you to touch it. As far as your question about how was that to deal with the public after Tiger King, my goodness, I had no idea there were so many people out there who would believe what they saw on TV and not do any research at all. And we pretty quickly put out that page at bigcatrescue.org/Netflix, where I went through the film minute by minute and said, when you were seeing this online, this is what was actually happening behind the scenes, or this is the information I gave the producers that showed that, my husband had been suffering from dementia. He had been diagnosed as being bipolar. He was flying without a license. And that's why there were no manifests at any airports, because he had to take off from airports that were closed, and he had to take off and land when they were closed, and he had to fly under 200 feet in order to evade the radar. And so I put all of that information in there for anybody who wanted to look, but people don't want to look. 64 million people apparently saw Tiger King, and I'd say probably about 63.5 million of them believed what they saw without any further concern. And, from my perspective, why should they care? Why should they care whether or not I did any of the things they said that I did? So I can't really be, I don't feel critical of those people. I don't take it personally, because it's not important to them. If it was important to them, like it clearly was to you, then they'll go on and they'll do some research on their own and find out the truth.
Yeah. Everything we do at MindKite here is really to do with mental health and mindset, or improving the mindset of people, especially coming out of this pandemic and things like that. People's mindsets have truly suffered. We have a lot of press in the UK, and we have a lot of, you know, reality TV stars as well, which suffer greatly from mental health through the scandals that get run by the journalists and through the stories that get put in the press, whether they're true or not. The press just loves a good story because the bad ones sell more, basically, you know. And I think that's kind of, you know, a lot of the time what happened here. But you handled it on the face of it, from what I can see, very, very well. And what would your advice be to anyone out there that's kind of going through, you know, struggles with the media or quite a lot of attention through, whether it be a TV show or a film or a program?
I think the reason that I was not harmed by this as far as my psyche goes is because I don't take it personally. And I don't take it personally because I believe that we are all connected and that we are all one. And I believe that when we are on the other side of the veil, we kind of look out and go, all right, these are the things that I plan to do this time on my planet Earth playground. And I'm going to bring all of these different people into my experience so that we can move consciousness forward toward a sense of being more enlightened and more appreciative of each other and have more gratitude and love for each other. And so whenever something horrible happens, like, you know, learning that somebody's trying to kill me, and, you know, for most people, they only learned that in Tiger King last year, but I've known these people have been trying to kill me for decades. And so they've been threatening me for decades. And I know that that is the case, but I believe that we've all come here to play this part. And so whenever I see either that kind of animosity toward me, or if I see the media spinning my story to fit their agenda, I have to look at that and say, all right, well, what's the good that's coming out of this? And if you look at Tiger King, I mean, people ask me all the time, are you the real Carole Baskin? And I say, who else would want to be Carole Baskin after Tiger King? Of course I'm the Carole Baskin. But it shows me that people just can't even conceive how horrible it would be to be like the most villainized person on the planet and to be misperceived by so many people. And so I think it shows me that we're all on this side of the veil and we can't remember that we're connected, and we can't remember that we're all trying to work toward this better goal. But by virtue of the fact of being one of the most hated people on the planet, it has now given me the opportunity to talk to people like you and maybe encourage people who are suffering from feeling, you know, forgetting who they are, to tell them to straighten their crown and remember that you are absolute magnificence in yourself and that you came here to do something great. So just try to refocus your mind on what that was that you came here to do and look for the ways that this can help. And so in my case, the way it's been able to help me is it's given me a platform all around the world to be able to talk to people about how we have to do things right now in order to save the tiger in the wild. And if we don't save the tiger in the wild, that means the entire life support system that we're all depending on, it collapses. And so we're going to have to find some other planet to play this game over and over on if we want to continue having these experiences of life and love together. So we got to save this planet this time around, or we're we're screwed. We'll have to come up with a different concept.
No, absolutely. And do you know the thing is, I've heard you speak a couple of times, and you speak so eloquently, and I'm catching so many, you know, those good vibrations that you're sending out as well. And that's exactly what I wanted to capture today, because I think that's a powerful thing to take any form of pain. And I didn't really want to go into it too much, but you talk about, you know, your life being in danger or having threats made to your life because of the caring job that you do. That's just, you know, it's disgusting for a start. It's terrible that things even came to that. But here we are. So you have a pain and you've turned that to power. And I think some of the most incredible stories come from when someone goes through a pain and turns it into power. But the thing is with you that I find, you know, really commendable is you have a pain that you've turned to power, but in the midst of all this, you're still doing your campaigning, you're still doing your lobbying with Congress, you're still doing, you know, looking after these animals. How did you manage to, you know, to keep that going in the midst of all this sort of chaos, basically?
Well, you know, I think sometimes it's actually the easiest time to really do something is when there is so much chaos. And a perfect example, when I lost my husband, I would have absolutely lost my mind at losing him because I knew he was suffering mentally. I worried so much about what was happening to him, where he was, and of course was spending an enormous amount of time trying to find him. But at the same time, I had 200 big cats that depended on me every day to get out of bed and make sure that the volunteers were there, that they were going to get fed, that there was money coming in to be sure that they didn't starve. I had a number of cats that we had rescued that were very small at the time and had to be bottle fed like every few hours. So I was having to get up around the clock to take care of them. And by having all of those things that were diverting my mind away from the fear and the loss that I was feeling, I think is what got me through that period of time. I think the same thing has happened since Tiger King, both with Tiger King and COVID hit within 5 days of each other for the sanctuary. And by having to close our gates, it meant that we were losing over $1 million a year in income. And so I had to let go half of my staff. And that meant the half of us that stayed had to work twice as hard. And by having to work twice as hard to do the same amount of work and to be pushing as hard as we possibly could to get this federal bill passed so that there weren't hundreds more cubs born and discarded next year, all of those kinds of diversions are what actually got me through the worst part of Tiger King's impact. The first 3 months or so after Tiger King is when I was getting the most calls and threats. And my phone was ringing like every 2 minutes with people wanting to tell me how much they hated me and how they wanted to kill me and they wanted to kill my family and they wanted to kill the cats. The worst part about not having my phone available to me is that if a bobcat gets hit by a car in the middle of the night, my phone is always on so that I can go out there, find that cat, get it to a vet, get it rehabbed, and get it back to the wild. I couldn't even answer the phone because it was going off every 2 minutes. I couldn't sleep at all for that 3-month period. So God only knows how many bobcats ended up dying during that period because I couldn't even answer the phone. And it was true for everybody at the sanctuary. My daughter, who does rehab with me, the main sanctuary lines, everybody had to turn their phones off during that period of time just because of all of the hatefulness that was out there. But again, I can't really hold that against people because I know what the timing was. Everybody got sent to their room by Mother Nature on March the 15th. And on March the 20th is when they saw Tiger King. And everybody was looking for, who can I blame for this situation that we're all in? We're locked in our houses. We can't see our loved ones. People are dying. We're losing our jobs. And Joe Exotic says everything is Carole Baskin's fault. So let's all pile on hating her. And it became like a global phenomenon for people to share these memes blaming me for everything, including coronavirus. And I feel like people needed somebody to blame during that period of time. Clearly, I did not cause coronavirus. If people were listening to me and they were vegans, they wouldn't have coronavirus right now because people wouldn't have been eating animals. So, I know in my own heart that that was not my doing. And I didn't take it personally, but it just was, it was something that I think people needed to have some kind of an outlet during that period of time.
Yeah, so for you maintained and stuck to your passion. You touched on something there as well, and again, you speak brilliantly, and it's so uplifting to hear that you've still kept that positive mindset, even about the people who've impacted your life and your sanctuary's life by the negative sort of energy and the negative things. And I'm sorry that you had to turn your phone off there, and I understand that working in mental health as well. I like to keep my phone on, because someone might need your help at any time of the morning. And so it's so important to be in that frame of mind. And it's fantastic you have. But you touched on something about the monetary value that, that the sanctuary lost being closed. And a big part of this, what people don't realize, is how much money it actually takes to rescue a big cat and to maintain a sanctuary like yours properly as well, I may add, and I just wonder if you could shed a little bit of light on that, because there's many people out there that just don't know how much hard work you've put into this, and many other like you that, want to do well by these animals.
Yeah, it costs us between $3.5 and $4 million US every year to take care of the cats that we have and to run the programs that we run. And that's a lot of money to have to raise every single year. We were concerned after Tiger King came out. We knew that the people who had already been donors of ours would stay with us because they knew that those were lies that were being told, and they did. In fact, a lot of them even doubled and tripled their donations because they expected this was going to be a hard year for us with both Tiger King and COVID. But what I wasn't sure of is whether or not others would ever donate to us if the first thing they ever heard about us was Tiger King. That just painted us as being no different than these people that are breeding cats for life in cages, when sanctuaries are absolutely against that. Our whole goal as a sanctuary is that we don't have to exist. If we had laws that protected these cats, we'd be out of business. And that's what we all want. We don't want to be in the business of rescuing cats from horrible situations. But as long as there are horrible situations happening and we have to do that kind of work, it's really expensive work. And, just one tiger in the wild can eat 60 pounds at a single setting. We feed our cats every day, 7 days a week. So they eat about 10 or 15 pounds per cat per day. But that's a lot of food, an awful lot of food. And our cats live twice as long as they live in the wild or in most other zoos or sanctuaries because we provide such a high level of care and vet care and great food for the cats. And so that's a commitment. If I rescue, like just recently, we rescued 3 tigers from a circus in Guatemala because Guatemala banned people having big cats in circuses. And whenever that happens, we don't want the circuses or the government to get stuck with those animals. And so the Animal Defenders International and Big Cat Rescue went in and rescued the cats. And one of the cats that came here was only a year-old cat. Well, he could live. I have one tiger right now who's 25. She's probably the oldest tiger on the planet. But that's 25 years that I'm going to be spending $10,000 per year on that single cat just to make sure he always has a place. And I think one of the things a couple things that people didn't get from Tiger King, one is that all of this captive breeding is actually harming tigers in the wild because these captive bred cats can never be set free. If they're born in a cage, they are doomed to life in a cage forever. And they're not purebred, so they wouldn't serve any kind of conservation value anyway, if it were even possible, which it's not. And I think another thing that people mistook from Tiger King was thinking that zoos and sanctuaries are in the same business. Zoos buy, breed, sell. They take the animals out to fairs and rodeos and those kinds of things. And some of them actually allow public contact. To be an accredited sanctuary, which we are, you can't buy, breed, sell, allow public contact, or take the animals off-site for visitation. So the zoos and sanctuaries couldn't be any more different. And yet Tiger King hurt. Every single big cat sanctuary that I know of is really struggling because of the fact that Tiger King painted them by painting me as a zoo. It did the same thing and said, well, these sanctuaries are no different than zoos. And so it's made it harder for all of these people who are doing amazing work protecting animals because of the way that we were all painted with that same brush.
Yeah, I mean, even up until last week, I seen like a meme online, and it was basically, this is me trying to work out, it was like someone doing that, me trying to work out the difference between, Joe Exotic keeping animals in a cage and Carole Baskin keeping animals in a cage. And I was looking at that and I was thinking to myself, who is this person even on my Facebook that can't see that? And a strong comparison that we kind of use here is, you can have a house full of drug addicts, or you can have drug addicts in a rehab center, which is completely different care. You have the same people, but gaining completely different care. And that's the easiest way I can explain it to these people when I see these type of things occurring, because it's so evident that, the difference between a sanctuary and these sort of petting zoos and wildlife zoos, how they take care of the animal. And that's why I wanted to touch on the monetary aspect, because I think people don't even realize there's even animal breeders out there that are happy to give, an animal away, not knowing the financial status of a person buying it. And those animals grow very quickly and they eat a lot. So people need to understand that. And I know that it's difficult to stop this type of trade. Sorry, Ma. Yeah, I know it's difficult.
It's so lucrative.
It's difficult to stop this type of trade, and it does happen. But there has to be some level of morality and some education behind that as well for people who are applying this trade, until it gets outlawed.
When we first started rescuing cats, the only people that we could turn to were the breeders and dealers, because when I contacted our local zoo, they just hung up on me because I was part of that pet industry. And so it took me a while to figure out what was going on. And in the early years, we actually believed what we were being told by people who were in this business. And they were saying that these are endangered species and you need to breed them for future generations or they're going to go extinct. And we never bred lions or tigers, but we thought some of the smaller cat species that were very rare, like the ocelot or margay or caracals, fishing cats, we thought that those were cats that should be bred for life in cages. And we thought that that was a stepping stone to those animals being able to go free. We didn't know that they could never go free. So from about 93 till 1997, we actually bred cats. And then I started, the internet didn't come along until then. And once I found out and started going to these like trade conferences for the big accredited zoos, that's where I found out that none of these cats in private hands served any kind of conservation value. So we stopped breeding right away. And even though we stopped breeding in 97, in Tiger King, they made it sound like we're still breeding today, like all of those people that you saw are breeding. And that's just absolutely not the case. As soon as we learned better, we did better and have been huge advocates for ending the captive breeding now that we know what we know since the 90s.
Well, you're an award winner as well. You're an award-winning sanctuary, aren't you? So you've done some fantastic stuff over the years, and clearly you know your stuff, and you've been doing it a long time. I would want to talk a little bit about this lobbying the government, because to go up to the government and start lobbying and going against, what is law just now, is massive, and that's a huge step. I know you already do a lot. You're sanctuary, and you're a busy woman. So to go against the government or go up against the government and try and get this law passed. Tell me about that journey and how that began and how it's going for you now.
Yeah, there's so many elements of that. So on the one hand, when I first started going to law enforcement and saying, this just can't be right, the way these animals are being treated. And they said, well, these are, the laws allow these kinds of activities. And so then feeling like, okay, well, I've got to figure out how to change the laws. And I didn't know anything about that. I left home at the age of 15. I didn't even have a high school education, much less a college education. And I had built a huge real estate business because I work hard and work 7 days a week, and I understand how to build a profitable business. But that and then running the sanctuary took so much of my time. And I'm thinking, how on earth am I going to make a difference on a national level by changing the laws? And so what I started doing was just going to every conference that I could find. I would follow along whenever somebody else was working on a bill. So like one of the bills that came up early in my experience was in the mid 90s. They were trying to outlaw pig gestation crates. Do you guys have those where the pig can't turn around in the little cage where she lives her whole life and has to nurse her baby standing up? And
I know what you mean, but I think we're not allowed them now. I don't believe we have them now. But yeah, I know what you're talking about. Horrible, absolutely horrible.
Yeah. Well, you guys are way ahead of us, as I said earlier. So that came up on my radar in the 90s because they said, you've got this huge following of people. Would you ask them to support this bill? And so I was like, yeah, I'll ask them to support this bill. But let me go along with you and see how you do this. And so I started tagging along and learning, what you have to do and who you have to talk to and who you have to impress. And what I have learned over the years is that donating to politicians is the best way to get their attention. So I can't give a politician $1,000 and say, I want you to do X. But if I give a politician $1,000 and then later sometime when I have a federal bill and I say, hi, remember me? I'm Carole Baskin. I can't talk about the money because you can't associate the two, but sometimes they'll remember you and want to do some kind of a favor back. So they'll at least look at the bill and see if it's something that they're willing to do. And that's the biggest problem that I've seen is there's thousands of these suggestions for laws that are coming in every year, and there's no way they could ever make every law or every suggestion into a law. So that's why there is this very painful process you have to go through, and why there's committees who have to hear your bill, and why everybody has the opportunity to present both sides. And they do a big thing where the government tries to figure out, how much will this cost us if we do this, or how much will this save us? In our case, it actually saves the government money, because then they don't have to pay all of these veterinarians, which are very expensive, to go around and inspect people having tigers in their backyard when they shouldn't even have tigers in their backyard. So, making that case in state laws and in federal laws has been a real learning experience for me. But I'd say the overarching lesson that I have learned is it doesn't matter how good your idea is or how much of a no-brainer something is. Getting something done is always going to be the result of creating relationships and constantly being up on their radar, helping them get what they want. If a politician wants to get a bill passed to create a stoplight instead of a stop sign at some street in their neighborhood, then helping them do that is what's going to have them help you do what you want to do. And it's been, in addition to running the real estate business and running the sanctuary, all of that extra work to trying to persuade lawmakers to do what you guys did in the 70s.
So what would this law sort of encompass? What would be the biggest win for you if this gets passed? What would the biggest win be that you would see happening from this bill?
So the federal bill that we're pressing right now is called the Big Cat Public Safety Act, and it only does two things. It bans cub petting. So it would be illegal for you to go and pet a cub or pay to pet a cub. Whether you pay or not, it's still illegal. So what drives all of that cub petting and all of the breeding, since they can only use the kittens until they're about 12 to 16 weeks, what drives that is social media. People post a picture of me, look at me holding a cub, aren't I special? And then everybody else wants to go do that. And that means they breed more and more of these cats who end up in horrible situations. So if it becomes illegal for you to have that picture, then Facebook and Instagram, they're going to be like, no, you can't post that on here. That's illegal. And that stops that demand for it. The other thing that the bill does, the only other thing that bill does, is it phases out private ownership. So people who have tigers or lions or big cats, they can keep them. They just can't buy or breed more. And as a result of passing this bill, since most of those cats don't live past 10 years with private owners, in the next 10 years, what we'll see is all of those cats will then die of old age, or a lot of people will just dump their animal if they can't use them to produce cubs as money makers. Those cats will go to sanctuaries. There's plenty of great sanctuaries out there that would provide lifetime care and not allow cub petting or breeding. So I think this whole crisis ends in 10 years once this bill passes. And I really think we are positioned now better than we ever have been to pass this year. We have over 160 co-sponsors in the House right now. And just yesterday, the Senate launched their version of it. So we are just working as hard as we can to get as many senators on it.
And with those two parts of that bill, I mean, it's just two things. But as you described there fantastically about, those young cubs, I didn't even think about it that way. Those pictures that are influencing in the social media are the reason why people are doing it. But then there's the problems that you said, that these cats are, these cubs are no good once they turn into cats, because the picture values in the cubs and the money's in, paying to stroke and take a picture with the cub. So that alone will have a massive impact. You talked also about the age of tigers and when they're kept in these sort of conditions. I've seen about 10-year-old. What would the normal age for them, the life expectancy be?
In the wild, big cats usually live 10 to 12 years. In most of the zoos or backyard cages, and I'm talking about the good zoos too, in most of those places, they only live to be 10 or 12. At Big Cat Rescue, our average age at death is 18. And we have right now a tiger who's 25. We have a whole bunch of cats that are over the age of 20 already, because it's peaceful at the sanctuary. It's not like what you saw in Tiger King. That was a one day a year event where we have like 600 people come in on one day. we only do that one day a year. The rest of the time, it's very peaceful out there. And so between that and getting great food and great vet care and our volunteers, they spend so much of their time doing things to try and alleviate the boredom of being stuck in a cage. And so every Wednesday, we have a whole group of volunteers who come in and make enrichment for the cats. They'll make sardini martinis or tuna melts, where we freeze the blood that comes off of the meat that we drain each day. And then they'll mix in sardines and freeze them in silo cups so that they make popsicles for the cats. Or they'll take toilet paper tubes and paper towel tubes and stuff them full of catnip or spices or spray perfume so that they have something to tear up and enjoy. That kind of enrichment's being handed out every single day at the sanctuary. And, that's another thing that I think people just don't realize is how much space these cats require. At Big Cat Rescue, the very smallest cage that we've had in the past 20 years has been 1,200 square feet for a single cat, like the size of your house cat. For the bigger cats, the very smallest cage we've had during that period of time was 1,800 square feet. My house here is less than 1,200 square feet, and my husband, me, and 2 cats all live in my house. So my cats at the sanctuary have a lot more space than I have. But even given that, we had a bobcat that came in for rehab. So the only cats who can go free are the ones who were born in the wild. So I love that part of what we do better than anything is the rehab and release, because I love being able to put them back into nature where they belong. But we had a bobcat who had her leg broken from being hit by a car. And we pinned it, and she had gone through the rehab in the hospital. And then she was finally in an outdoor cage. And our rehab cages are like 5,000 square feet because those cats have to get into hunting condition. I watched her on a camera the first day that she was out there in the outdoor thing. So she's maybe 4 weeks away from breaking her leg, that she's healed for about 4 weeks. She walked 16 miles when you figured how many feet in laps in a single night. A tiger will patrol 400 square miles. There's no cage in the world that is big enough to give these animals the kind of life that they require for their own mental health. And so that's why I am so opposed to having any exotic cats in cages.
No, absolutely. And I mean, all the way through this, you've been nothing but, educational. You speak with absolute passion. And I can see even when you were talking about the sort of Cats Pampered days there, how you're just smiling. It's not intentional. It's just happening. You've got a very clear passion, and that's what's took you on this journey. If there was anybody out there sort of listening to this, and I want people not only to be properly informed about yourself, which I think you've done fantastically here today, but I want them to be informed about this type of wildlife. What advice would you give for anyone out there to sort of help this process along, like not going to these petting zoos and, things of that nature? What other advice would be good for sort of members of the public if they ever thought about, these situations, or, maybe even owning a cat or something like that? What would your advice be to them?
I would say it's not fair to the cat. And it's not fair because you can't provide hundreds of square miles of territory for your cat. You can't afford to build the type of enclosure that it would take to keep a cat in a cage, because any small cat can get out of any kind of an open roof cage. The bigger cats aren't great climbers. But I think the biggest impact that your listeners can make is every time you see somebody posing with a cub or petting some kind of baby wild animal, or walking one on a leash, or even somebody who's commenting on something like that saying, "Oh, I want one," or "I'd love to do that." I think it's important to reach out to those people in a loving way, not hatefully, not critically, but saying, you probably wouldn't say that if you knew what that life was like for that animal. And here's a resource that can show you that. So at cubtruth.com, we have a website that has just put 3 or 4 very short, very simple videos that explain what that life cycle is for the cats and why that is always a cruel thing to do, in the hopes that people will share that easy to remember URL and that people will get educated about why it's always so cruel to be sharing those images. And once people stop sharing that stuff, then it stops that whole industry. We can change the laws here in the US. I don't know whether or not I can have that impact in South Africa. And, part of what is driving us to try and change the laws here in the US so strongly is that it does have an impact on other nations. CITES is the Convention on Trade in Endangered Species, and they get together. All these countries come in that are members to this treaty on how we're going to treat endangered species. And China wants to, because China has now lost all of the tigers in their forests due to poaching, they want to farm tigers to provide tiger bone wine and tiger claws and tiger skin. And they say if we farm tigers, then that takes the pressure off of wild tigers. Actually, it doesn't. What it does is it normalizes the idea of killing these animals and taking their parts. And it creates, again, a legal smokescreen for illegal activity. It's always going to be a lot cheaper to shoot a tiger in the wild than it is to raise it up until it's 4 or 5 years old and then take their skins and their teeth and their claws. So if it costs us $10,000 per year, they'd have $50,000 invested in a tiger, and it's going to be much cheaper to kill one in the wild. And people who can afford those kinds of luxury products, which is what they're being marketed as in Asian countries, people who can afford that, they don't want some cage-bred, inbred cat. They want the premium product. They want the wild tiger. And so that's why we'll lose the tiger in the wild in the next 5 years if we don't stop this. And so when we go to CITES and we tell China, no, you shouldn't do that, this is why this is so bad, they look at us and they say, you in the US, you don't even know where your tigers are. We know where our tigers are. They're in these big state-sanctioned tiger farms. And so we have no credibility on the global stage to stop the abuse in other places until we clean up our own act.
And what's the tiger situation in the wild? Because from what a lot of reports I'm reading, there's just as many or more in captivity, around the world than what there is in the wild. Would that be right?
We've lost 95% of the tiger population in the last 100 years. And I read an article yesterday that said just in the last 20 years, we've lost between 50 and 75% of those cats. And that in the next 5 years, we'll lose another 50 to 75%. So we're down to under 4,000 tigers, I think, in the wild between India and Russia. And in captivity in the US, we don't even know how many there are. The last time they did a census was back in 2004. And back then there was, I'm thinking 5,000 or 6,000 cats that were in USDA facilities, which are licensed facilities. That doesn't include all of the people that had them in backyards and basements that are not licensed and not required to be licensed under current law.
It's massive. It's massively important that your bill passes there as well, and I really hope it does. I wanted to touch a little bit on your social networking sites, especially your YouTube, because your YouTube is massive and it must be making an impact around the world. I think you've got about 1 million subscribers on there. You've got many views of your videos on there as well. I just wanted to talk a little bit about that and how you're using your social media just now to sort of promote your campaign, and what you would like to see on there in the future, and basically how anybody else can help you promote what you're doing and what you're about.
Back in the 90s, when we first started the sanctuary, we couldn't afford to hire staff. And so for many years, we could only have 3 paid staff, because if you had 4 paid staff, you had to provide workers' compensation, which was grossly expensive and we couldn't afford it. So we had to do everything with volunteer help, which has been great, because that's why our animal care has not suffered during COVID, because all of the animal care is done by volunteers. But when I could only afford to pay 3 staff members, I paid a man to manage our volunteers. I paid a woman to manage the gift shop sales of, hats and t-shirts and things that had our logo on it. And the third one, which is the one everybody's like, you did what? I hired a videographer. I hired somebody to document everything that happens at the sanctuary every day and put that out in video form everywhere you can possibly get video uploaded. And back in the 90s, that was not many places. So, it's grown over the years from MySpace and Friendster and things like that. But the videographer also did photos. So they built up our Flickr accounts, if you remember Flickr. And we've always kept those three positions. So having a videographer that every day is filming these cats doing what they love to do, which is eat and play and tear stuff up, and then putting that out on the internet once a week in YouTube and then daily out there on Facebook and these other channels, that has been what has driven, I think, the vast majority of people to come find out what we're about. And we've always had a policy of doing at least 80% of our videos are about things that people want to know, like, do big cats chase laser pointers? Do big cats like catnip? Do big cats, whatever. Things that are just silly and fun and have no message, because the important 20% of things that we want to get out there, the messages about why these cats don't belong in cages and how people can help either through reaching out to their member of Congress or through donating or through telling their friends why cub petting is so cruel. If we can get them to love us with that 80%, then when we give them the 20% that says, hey, now we need your help, that has been very successful because they're getting what they want. They've come to love those animals as individuals. And we've started putting live webcams in all of the cages that we can afford. We're actually doing a big fundraiser right now to put more live webcams in more cages, because during COVID, people can't visit, but they still want to see the cats. So they can go choose from a panel of all of the different cats they love and just pop in on them and see how they're doing. So that's been, I think, our best investment has been into video and then answering everyone's questions. When we post a video or a photo, we have literally hundreds of people who are fans of big cat rescues, who have been trained and know all of the same information that I could give anybody else. They sit there and they wait for somebody to make a comment, and then they engage with them in a very respectful and loving way. So we have people that come into our social sites all the time being hateful after Tiger King, and they'll just be like, well, we know why you might feel that way, because Tiger King really did a good job of misleading people, but here's the truth about that. And they'll lead them through it. And so those have become some of our most avid supporters, because people hate to be lied to. And Tiger King really lied to millions of people about the work that we do. So I'm really excited about the fact that so many people have turned the corner and become even stronger supporters as a result of all of our social activities.
I think you hit the nail on the head there. When you find out you've been lied to and you feel cheated, you go so much stronger in the opposite direction. So I'm glad that you have that support now. I've checked out your pages. They're fantastic. Your YouTube's fantastic. If you could just tell the audience just where they can sort of find you, Carole, where they can find your sanctuary, how they can support you, and where they can see your videos, your social medias. If you just give them your sort of handles, that means it's out there for the public, and I'm sure that my supporters will love you as much as I have today.
Well, thank you, Jamie. Yeah, bigcatrescue.org is our main website, and you can find links there to everything else that we do. If you go on any social channel and just type in Big Cat Rescue, you'll find us with the blue tick mark showing you which one's the right one. A lot of people try to copy our name, but we are the one that is verified. And then I never had any intention of creating a personal brand, but when I was on Dancing with the Stars, they wouldn't let me use our corporate accounts for Instagram and Twitter. And so I started creating a separate handle there that I use for the dancing, but it's been for people that wanted to engage more with me personally than the overall sanctuary work. And so you can find me as Carole Baskin. I'm verified everywhere. It's just Carole Baskin. And then if you're on Clubhouse, that's my latest jam. I'm loving Clubhouse. That's been a lot of fun.
Absolutely fantastic. Carole, you've been amazing today, exceeded all my expectations. And as you can imagine, myself telling people that you were coming on the show, a lot of people had a lot of stuff to say, and I see through all the facade of most people and most situations in journalists and things like that. I think you're doing a fantastic job. I've really enjoyed my time speaking to you. It's been very educational and inspiring, you know, especially coming from a company, MindKite, which is about mental health and mindset. I think your mindset is absolutely sterling, and I hope a lot of the viewers will be able to take, you know, something away from this, if albeit a little bit of education about the cats, and hopefully a big bit of education about Carole Baskin and who you really are. So thank you for your time. Thank you for coming on. There you have
delightful.
it. Brilliant. Absolutely. Listen, I absolutely loved the time. I loved it. So there you are, everyone. Another episode of the MindKite podcast with the fantastic Carole Baskin. Please go and check out her stuff. Like, follow, share, subscribe, and do the same with the MindKite. Do the same. Like, follow, share, and subscribe if you like what you've seen today. And yeah, go and hit Carole up on the socials, as long as you be nice, because she's a lovely lady.